this module 16, configuring network and device security. So look at wireless security measures, implement wireless security, and configure a firewall. So we're going to do all of this. So there are labs attached to this particular module that you have access to from the platform. So wireless vulnerabilities. So wireless, there are some kind of vulnerabilities that can come or that are introduced once your network becomes wireless. All right, and wireless was just provided to ease the convenience of connecting devices, so that just to um, solve the problem of the complexities when it comes to having physical cables and connecting devices that are far away from each other. So unfortunately now, that ease of connectivity and the fact that the information is transmitted through the air also makes the wireless network vulnerable to interception and attacks such as wall driving. So wall driving is the process of driving around and searching for wireless networks. When a wireless network is found, the location of the wire of the WLAN is logged and shared. And when you say logged, that's the information is just taken down and shared. So when the access to the WLAN is compromised, an attacker can access the network from any location the wireless signal reaches, right? So special security features and implementation methods are required to help protect a wireless LAN from attacks. So let's look at some of these measures. So basic wireless settings. So you should always change the default SSID, right, and disable SSID broadcast. So remember I said the SSID is the name of your uh, Wi-Fi network, right? So your SSID, your SSID now, which is supposed to be your service set identifier, right? That's actually the full meaning. Should not be broadcasted. So when it's not broadcasted, it means that nobody will be able to see your Wi-Fi, your hotspot when it is turned on, or your MiFi when it is turned on. All right, because it's not broadcasting its SSID, it means that it's going to be hidden. So only those systems that have been connected to your SSID before, right, or to your hotspot before will be able to connect, because except you go and add that particular network manually. That's why on your Wi-Fi you see something like when you open your Wi-Fi on your phone, you can see add network manually, right? Even on your system too. Then also wireless security. So you have to set the security profile for each band to use what? WPA2 personal or AES and passphrase, right? So those are security features for securing wireless networks, okay, or wireless hotspots. Let me put it that way, or Wi-Fi. Okay, so that those are the standards for securing Wi-Fi. All right, so there's WPA, there's WPA2. All right, so those actually help you set the standards for passwording your Wi-Fi. Then also MAC address pitch filtering. So configure the specific MAC address to prevent or permit on the wireless local area network. So you can set your Wi-Fi to only accept a particular MAC address. So remember I said MAC address, if you followed up, is like your fingerprint, right? So it's something that is unique to you already. So IP address is only what is given to you when you are part of a network. But when you are, whether you are part of a network or not, you always have a MAC address. A MAC address is installed on the wireless card, right? Either the Ethernet port or the Wi-Fi card. Then there's port forwarding. So configure the port that should be forwarded to a specific device, such as a web server in the demilitarized zone. All right. So configure the IPv4 addresses for the server in the what? Demilitarized zone. So this one now is just so that the browser can only be used to do specific tasks. All right, and you won't be allowed. It won't be allowed to visit other websites. All right, so let's look at SSID broadcast. So one easy way to gain entry to a wireless network is through the network name, which is the SSID. All right, so normally all SSIDs are being broadcasted, right? But when you turn off or deactivate the broadcasting of SSID, no client or no host device can connect to the network. So the SSID broadcast feature can be turned off, just like I said. So on this picture here, you are going to see enable disabled. All right, you see SSID was broadcast. Even on your phone too, you can check it. I use a Samsung phone, so on my hotspot setting, you see broadcast SSID. So I can turn it on or I can turn it off. So turning it off means that anybody that is not connected to your network before or that doesn't know your SSID will not be able to connect to your network. But now, that's not just what protects the SSID. So if somebody already knows the name of your network, he can connect to it and he knows the password, he can connect to your network. That's from experienced threat actors. So most wireless access points and routers are pre-configured with settings such as SSIDs, administrator password, and IP addresses. So these default settings are well known, right? Because they can just go and look up the particular device on the internet and find out the default gateway, all right, the default IP address. Just like MTN MiFi, all MTN MiFi has a default. All MTN routers generally, both MiFi or router, 4G router, 3G router, they have a default gateway of 192.168.0.1. So that's the default IP address of every router that is wireless. That's for MTN. Glo is 192.168.8.1. Airtel has their own, all right? Every other network have theirs. That is their default IP address. So it's a private IP address. So changing the default settings on a wireless router will not protect the wireless network by itself. So for example, SSID are transmitted in plain text. So even the SSID broadcast turned off and the default values change, attackers can still learn the name of the wireless network through the use of devices that intercept wireless signals. So other security measures should be put in place to implement or help protect your network. So such as authentication and encryption. Now let's look at MAC address filtering. So one way to limit access to wireless network is through filtering of MAC addresses. So if your MAC address filtering have been configured, all right, so when a wireless client attempts to connect or associate with your access points, all right, or your router, the wireless router or access point will look up the MAC address of the connecting client and permit or deny device onto the wireless network based on what configuration. So which means that if the particular device is not among this MAC address table or this list of MAC addresses, it's going to be denied. So for example, now you can see this are connected to this router wirelessly, right? So you can see the MAC address 5C22. So 5C22 is among the list of MAC address. So network connection is what permitted. 0162 is among, so connection is permitted, but AD75 is not on this MAC address list, right? So the connection was what denied. So some issues are with this configuration. So the person setting up the wireless router or access point will have to enter MAC addresses manually. So this measure does not scale well, right? Because you have to imagine you want to do for 100 pieces, you now have to enter those 100 pieces MAC address manually. And that doesn't help you because it's going to be very, very ambiguous. So let's look at implement wireless security. Another way to control who can connect to your network is to implement authentication. So authentication is the process of permitting entry to a network based on a set of credentials. So it is used to verify that the device that is attempting to connect to the network is trusted. So the use of a username and password is a most common form of authentication. Just like when you are in your school now, when you want to connect to a network, they'll tell you, oh yeah, it will be open. No, do not say sign into network. It will not open a website for you. One MNS website or MSN website for education website and tell you to log in. So Some of them will even tell you the free password for free users, okay, so that you can connect to the extranet. They'll tell you log in with this, put the same username and password there to log in. Then some of them have unique username and password. For example, the routers that are dedicated, or access points that are dedicated for staff. Now, every staff will be given their own login details to use to log into that network, so that they can have access to the internet over a higher bandwidth. So in a wireless environment, authentication, if enabled, must occur before the client can connect to the WLAN. So there are different types of wireless authentication. There is um, PSK, EAP, and SAE. So by default, wireless devices do not require authentication. This is referred to as open authentication. So open authentication should only be used on public wireless networks, or on networks where authentication will be done by other means. So let's look at authentication as association. So authentication is to verify that the device that is attempting to connect to the network is what's trusted. Association is for a client to successfully connect to the access point and carry data communication. So after authentication is enabled, regardless of the method used, the client must successfully pass authentication before it can associate with the what access point and join the network. So if both authentication and MAC address filtering are enabled, authentication occurs first. Then what next? MAC address filtering. So when authentication is successful, the access point will now check the MAC addresses against the MAC address table. So the MAC address of the system is trying to connect, so it will now check if it's on the what MAC address table. So after that verification, now the access point now adds that particular host MAC address to its host table. So the client is then said to be associated with the what access point and can connect to the network. So early wireless routers used an encryption protocol known as what WEP, which is wired equivalence protocol, to secure wireless transmission between clients and access points. So, and that WEP now uses pre-configured keys to encrypt and decrypt data. So a WEP key is entered as a string of numbers and letters, and generally probably 64 to 64 bit or 128 bit long, and in some cases 256 bit long, just depending on the strength of the encryption. So this wired equivalence protocol also came with some weaknesses, which include the use of static keys on all WEP enabled devices. So all WEP enabled devices had the same key. So one way to overcome this was when WPA was introduced. That's the Wi-Fi protected access. All right. So then WPA was the first, then WPA2, right, was also introduced. WPA2 used from 64 bits to 256 bits. So it's always generates dynamic keys each time a client establishes a connection with the access point. So the version of WPA2 designed for home network is designated as WPA2 PSK. Now let's look at firewall. So we've been hearing firewall for a while, and we need to understand how that works. So what firewall does is that it prevents undesirable traffic from entering protected areas of the network. So a firewall is one of the most effective security tools available for protecting internal network users from external threats. So a firewall is usually installed between two or more networks and controls the traffic between them, as well as helping towards prevent unauthorized access. So firewall products use various techniques for determining what is permitted or denied into the network. So, and some of those techniques could include port filtering, right? So that some kind of services are denied over that particular network. So firewalls can be implemented in softwares, all right, via softwares or network devices, right, or servers. So they are firewall devices, right? Cisco produce firewall devices. So that's, I mean, like a, you know, the way a Cisco router looks like, or a Cisco switch looks like. So there could be a device now like that is called a firewall. So firewall may be a hardware device, right? Then a firewall can be configured to block multiple individual external devices by IP addresses to permit or deny packets matching the range of what TCP or UDP ports. Is what I was talking about now. So firewall passes through different types of traffic into a network. So responses to traffic that originates from inside the network and traffic originated from outside the organization that is destined for a port that you have what intentionally permitted, such as a server located in the what the DMZ, right? Demilitarized zone. So additionally, firewalls open perform network often what perform network address translation. Alright, so remember what network address translation is, right? Trans um, Changing a host IP address from a private IP to a public IP address. So the militarized zone now has some capabilities. So it actually refers to the area of the network that is accessible and controlled for both internal and external users. Alright, so it is more secure than the external network, but not as secure as the internal network. So with wireless router, a simple demilitarized zone can be set up that allows an internal server to be accessible by outside hosts. So the server requires a static IP address that must be specific to specify it in the demilitarized zone configuration. So the wireless router isolated traffic destined to the IP address specified. Then this traffic is then forwarded only to the switch port where the server is connected. So right here you can see so this is actually a wireless router, right, that's connected in to home router. So this is the demilitarized zone, all right, which is the web server. Probably you're providing web services from home. So this is an external person on the external network. So the external person, right, connects to through Wi-Fi now, okay, to your server. So the firewall here mm, is what actually secures this person from having unprivileged access to what your web server. Whereas your web server now is also connected to a switch, which is connected to your what home network, either your host one or host two. Probably any of your systems are connected to the same switch, and all of them are connected to are all located inside the wireless router. So now this wireless router now is just actually what has all of these features, right? So there's another thing that is called port forwarding. So they say that it's another way for users to reach devices inside the network through the internet. All right. So port forwarding now is rule based. All right. It's a rule based method of directing traffic between devices on separate network. Okay. And this method of exposing internal devices to the internet is safer than what using what the demilitarized zone. So when incoming traffic from the internet switches the router, the firewall in the router determines if the traffic should be forwarded to a certain device based on the port number found with the traffic. So the port numbers are associated with what specific services. Remember I talked about this, whether it is going to be file transfer protocol, hypertext transfer protocol, hypertext transfer support protocol, secure, the POP3, which is for mail servers. So this the port forward rules configured in the firewall settings determine which traffic is what permitted on to the what inside local area network. So you can see here now HTTP. The protocol here is set to what TCP for FTP, TCP, Telnet, TCP, SMT, TCP. Let's move forward. So there's something called port triggering. So port triggering allows the router to temporarily forward data through inbound TCP or UDP ports to a specific device. So port triggering can be used to forward data to a computer only when a designated port range is what's used to make an outbound request. So once that port range, for example, this is a range that has been triggered here, all right, and you can see the forwarded range, right, and enabled is checked. So one usage for port triggering is multiplayer games, where a number of TCP and UDP connections should exist between the players while the game is active. So port triggering should be configured carefully because leaving a large number of ports open to the internet can represent a security risk. All right, so we've looked at a lot of stuffs, some how security can be done over the network. I talked about you not broadcasting your SSID, so not broadcasting your SSID of your access point or your router or wireless device or hotspot is not a complete way of securing your network. All right, and you also have to set up a firewall. Okay, you can also set up a demilitarized zone. All right, you can also use port forwarding, port filtering. You could also use MAC address filtering. When setting up a home network, you can set up a MAC address what filter, such that you are going to assign MAC addresses on a MAC address list on the router, so that whenever anybody that is not, whenever the host device that doesn't have a MAC address that the router that is on the routing table, all right, that particular host will be denied from what joining the network. All right, so we'll be moving on to the